Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Just Crunch It. This is a very new thing we are trying here for a change. We are going to step away from the boring world of databases, warehousing, semantic maps, and all the things we keep talking about. With us today, we have Grace Gong. Grace is the founder and CEO of Smart Ventures Podcast and Smart Ventures Media. Every workday at 9 a.m. PST, she also goes live with a GP or an LP or a founder to talk about startups, investing, business, pretty much the same things we talk about, but they're phenomenal shows. And this is all through her new show, Venture with Grace. She's an angel investor, has played in various capacities at different media companies, and has published 2 books over the years. She meets probably 99.99% of us keep meeting people. She meets more exciting folks than most of us do. Well, for some of us, like for me, the kind of people she meets is very, very, very interesting. Welcome to the show, Grace, and welcome to the other side. How are you doing today?
I am good. Hi, Vikram. Thank you so much for having me on your show. This is such a nice introduction. Also, I
No,
love the name
I'm
Just
glad
Crunch
to
It.
have you here.
Oh, sorry. I think we have a
Yeah,
delay because of the platform, but I was going to say I really love the name Just Crunch It.
no, I love it too. There's a whole history behind Crunch. I have never talked about it, so I'll probably share it with you. When I was a kid, my dad, he used to get this chocolate. It used to come in
Mm.
the form of like a truck, right? Like, so there's a small toy truck, and on the backside where you have the big carrier, you had like these bars of chocolate stacked over each other, and they were all crunched. So I think it was just chocolate with like sugar crystals or something in it, pretty unhealthy. I don't know, but it tasted amazing as a kid. And
Mhm.
Crunch became something which was very like a childhood favorite name of sorts. And somehow,
Mm.
without any plan, I ended up doing a data company. So in data, crunching data has a lot of significance, and
I
that's
think we
how I landed on Crunch and just Crunch it.
amazing. Sorry, I think we had a minute of or so delay, but I was I listened to all the description of the chocolate part, which I'm really excited. The crystal sugar thing. I love everything unhealthy, so this is like right to my appetite.
I'm glad. Let's get started. Grace, I have a lot of questions for you which are very off topic because
Mhm.
we usually discuss only data and all things very nerdy stuff here. But with you, I think the broader theme that I want to keep today is how does someone go about creating their identity, given that you've worked in media, given that you've spent so much of time, let's say, uh, building your audience. It is not easy to get into rooms with the people you have gone into. And you know it, like probably when you started, it was harder as you started building it. So there's a lot of ambiguity around, hey, how do I handle the distribution aspect? And that is what I want to broadly touch on all through the episode. And this is also for the context of my audience. But for an introduction, Grace, how did Grace become Grace? Like, what has the story been? What has contributed the most to, let's say, doing whatever you're doing today?
Totally. I think one of the things I would mention is I feel like people are really focused on the distribution. I wanted to start with like how people could get distribution. So I think for distribution meanings like other people find your content beneficial and they want to take a listen, right? And why would someone wants to take a listen at you or anything that you have to offer is you have to provide value. And to understand how you provide value, you have to find out what you can offer to the world that's meaningful and that's actually helpful for people. For me is, I came to the US as an international student and I have absolutely no business connection in the world. And I went to school in the suburb of Illinois, and I feel like I'm very not close by Silicon Valley by any means. But when I moved to the Silicon Valley, I recognize there's a unique unfair advantage of being here, which is people have close access to a lot of really talented people. And I, from like founders to investors to like big tech executives, I feel like for Silicon Valley, there is access that like nowhere else you can easily access to. And I really wanted to leverage that to help people like my younger self who may not be, having a lot of business connection to understand business, to understand how the world works, and to understand what is some opportunities and career opportunities or life opportunities out there. How do
Yeah,
you even know what you want in life if you have never know what existed in the universe, right?
yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, what were you
No,
about to say?
no. I just had a very random thought. So, like, I want to do some myth busting here of sorts. A lot of people I speak to, they're like, "Oh, hey, so yeah, of course, there's a benefit of being in the valley and you have access to a lot of people, but I can also reach out to those people online. You know what? Like, I'm sitting in San Francisco. I'm anyway reaching out to them online. For you personally, most of the connections that you have built, have they happened through in-person bump ups? Have they happened through online connections? Like, how does it work out? Could you bust that myth for us, or like probably attest to it?
I think it's a mixture of everything. I don't think I intentionally trying to build a connection just so that I could have so and so on my podcast per se, because
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was going to start a podcast like 3 years ago, right? So I feel like a lot of it were amplifying what I've been already doing. I have published books before, and I have worked in venture capital before, and throughout my experience, I have built up a network throughout many many years. So people have taken notice because of I had a podcast. But before that, I feel like it was a lot of like just following my curiosity. I don't think I intentionally trying to be like, hey, um, like XYZ come on my podcast because like, the podcast is fairly like a new thing. I feel like I've always been like a curious person to follow like who I thought was interesting to like, learning about new things in general.
Yeah, it's I relate to that because honestly, just crunch it. The very idea was not to, hey, we are a data company, so let's have a data related podcast. What happened was I was doing customer research with a lot of enterprise leaders, and I realized that I'm throwing all of these terms, AI, data, warehouses,
Mhm,
and they're nodding, but back of their head when I met them over coffee, I was like, hey, Vikram, I don't have much of a clue right now in terms of what
mhm,
the organization is going to do. And I realized that these senior leaders who may have been at Microsoft and Google and Oracle in the past, who cannot go into the public because they would face a backlash and say that we don't know what our AI strategies, they're just nodding to all the AI stuff. And maybe if we can talk about some of the things that is maybe keeping them awake at night, maybe just helps someone. So that is how the whole episode came on. And today we are somewhere close to like almost recording. I think we published 12, 13 of them. We're close to recording about 20, 25. And there's a whole pipeline of interesting people who are coming up. So on that note, Grace, you've talked about distribution from the angle of a podcast, but most founders here who actually want to build an audience, and when I say build an audience, it's about, hey, I have this idea. I want to be Elon Musk who could go onto Twitter and say, I'm going to launch a $8 pricing per month and get a million people to give a feedback
mhm.
on what's happening, right? Like that's luxury. You, if you have that, you have a lot of power in your hand because you'd not have to hire a company that charges you $250,000 for like some customer research. You'd probably end up the obvious pitfalls of not building something that people don't need. uh, Having met so many people, having been in the VC space, when you look back on everything and let's say you're starting from scratch today, how do you build leverage in value as a founder, or what would you recommend a founder to do to build leverage in the value? Would it be meeting new people? Would it be launching a podcast? Would it be starting a newsletter? Would it be just building what they feel like and testing it? What are your thoughts there?
I think just 3 words: know your stuff. Like, I think, to be completely honest, I think, like you just mentioned, right? Like, people would ask you, what is AI? What is data warehouse? Like, what does it mean for XYZ? I think by knowing your stuff, that's where your value is. People have different skill set. People have different things that they're specialized in. I don't think there's like a one way fit all kind of thing. Like, if you want to build a distribution like Elon Musk, there's a lot goes into it. Elon knows his stuff. Like, he knows how to build billion-dollar businesses. That's why people follow him. People don't follow him for, uh, just like talking about random memes or something at the beginning, right? People follow him because of he is a very he's a doer, he's a builder, he is a successful entrepreneur. So that's what he's known for. I think building a brand comes down to, do you really know your stuff? Like, you could talk about your own sector, no matter how niche it is, you will find audience.
But if you know your stuff, you still got to talk about it, right? Like, which is what a lot of people don't do. They don't ever share what's happening. If you are sitting on your computer and writing something, maybe in the tech world they have this GitHub page which has a lot of credibility, or maybe they have this anonymous handle behind which a lot of following exists, but that doesn't necessarily translate to someone outside reaching out to them in the valley. Do you still recommend people to actively go out and publish content? I have been guilty of not doing it myself.
I think it really depends on what outcome you're trying to achieve, right? If you're trying to help people who doesn't know anything about data, I think putting out just crunch is perfect, as like people will discover it if the content is like very useful for them, right? Like, people will recommend it to other people. I feel like the most underrated marketing is word of mouth. Is by creating a product that can scale. The product that can scale is your content. To be completely, using the Silicon Valley buzzwords. Uh, I think the other thing is like really depends on what you want to attract, right? Like, I feel like honestly, if you want to attract other people who are interested in data, or other people who are very technical, who are interested in exactly the kind of things that you are interested in, why not gatekeep? Like, why not just like publish things on GitHub, so that like people, you will only attract to the group of people that who can also, actually read things from GitHub, who can actually understand. I feel like you may attract less amount of people, but you may attract the exact type of people you
Right.
want to attract.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, as you're just saying this, I realized how easy it is to like get lost into biases around you, which is like publish more, have a following on Twitter and whatnot. But it makes 100% sense to do what you're saying. And to be honest, like what it's summarized as, or what I am basically getting to it as, like, don't overthink, just know your stuff. and keep doing good work, and rest follows. If you try over designing it, it would probably just like not work out at the pace that you want it to work out at, and maybe that leads to some frustration here or there. But I still want to touch base on something that I have personally dealt with, and I have not been good at it initially. It took me a while to crack it. So I grew up for a good part of my life in India, and when I moved to the Bay Area, I had, in fact, I moved because some of my founder circle friends were like, hey, Vikram, there's a lot of advantage. You're trying to build something in data. There's someone else building in data, but they are meeting the right kind of people. You're trying to request them FaceTime over Zoom. Why don't you come and grab a coffee with them? Maybe it's going to lead to feeling like, hey, there's not much to do. And that is what I was holding myself back. I was like, okay, if I go to the Bay Area, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit in a hotel room or an Airbnb or maybe a friend's place, and I'm just going to be doing the same work that I'm doing here. So why spend that money? As a company, you should be frugal. And I would convince myself in all of these ways as to why it doesn't make sense. And it is awkward when you go and when you land into the US and you try reaching out to the first few people. It is awkward because maybe the first meeting comes after 2 days and then there's no meeting for another 3 days. But then it starts just like working very easily. And that is where you unlock. But that phase, a lot of people hesitate going through that. I know of over 100 founders back in India who would probably like 10x their business if they just moved here, because there's US is very relational, but at the same time they're very clear in certain aspects, which is what businesses need. Back in East, where we come from, there's so much of personal chemistry that when you're trying to sell a product, or like let's say do a pilot with someone, you would be expected to do it rather free of cost, or you'd be expected that you would make some extra considerations for them. In US, no one like questions you on those fronts. You go in and say, I'm doing a pilot, they're like, oh, a pilot, you want money for it? Of course, it makes sense, pilots have to be paid. So there's a lot of cultural difference, which I think is great because people are very direct. They give you feedback here, which helps you, like which stops you from making mistakes. But for all of those people, is there like anything you've learned over the years when it comes to in-person networking? Because how do you make it less awkward or most fruitful for you? Let's say if you land today out of all the places, and it could be any city, it could be New York, it could be the Bay Area, it could be any place. You have these meetups, you have a lot of things happening. You go to a cafe, you sit, but you still need to like talk to the person next to you. Could you talk about what your mindset there is if you were starting out a company today and you wanted to do some in-person networking, because you have nothing else to do? Let's say you're just building your product. How do you approach that?
I think there are three things I would think about. Number one is I would write down like, what is the motivation behind me meeting people? And number two is what can I offer to them? Because I think people always think, oh, what can I get out of this situation? But to be completely honest, like business is a two-way street. You will never be able to just get away with like getting. It's always like, what can you provide to other people? It should be like a two-way street. And number three is I feel like, again, like just be yourself. I don't think showing up as like you want to, you know like be extremely extra confident is the best thing or the best approach, or like trying to talk to as many people as possible. I think you should go at your own pace, because know yourself and be comfortable about who you are also make other people feel like they're at ease. If you feel like, which I think you are, like everybody have something to offer to the universe, you just have to really um calm down and then like really think about like what is the purpose behind me like moving to, or like you moving to the US to build a network for yourself, to build like a, to make sure you have your company have better chances to succeed. That's why you move here. And then you really write down, how your business can help other people, right? You build a business that have clients means like people value your services and people value your work, which gives you an advantage of like, you are providing value. So, and number three is just make yourself feel at ease because of you have done your own work, and you don't have to just set an unrealistic goal for yourself. Just go at your own pace. If you want to meet one person today or five people today,
Yeah.
or you just feel like this is not your vibe, you can just straight go home. I think everything is all at your own control. Really, just I feel like you have to just find the balance in your own mind to be comfortable about what you can do and what you want to do.
Grace, you have had a very different journey, right? Like you studied media back in 2007. From there, you built this show today. You published books. You've met people, and I'm sure you've heard about AI, which is everything. People are doing these things. Things have gone crazy. And back in 2018, 19, 20, when I was with this company called Sprinkler, we were working with some really big brands, and social media was the buzzword back then. Everyone wanted to market on social media. Everyone wanted to be there in your Instagram feeds. This is not that long back, but it still feels it was decades back. And these big brands, they were going crazy about, hey, the future is going to be you board a flight, you, let's say, post an Instagram picture about how your flight is delayed because you're frustrated and you're sharing everything, and then this hotel that you are checking in after you land already knows that you have a delayed flight. So when you reach the hotel reception, They are going to basically offer you a cold drink saying, hey, we're very sorry you had a terrible flight experience. And you take customer like first interactions to the next notch. Like, I already know that, oh, Grace has a cashew allergy or almond nut allergy or like milk allergy, something like that. And then I'm being considerate of that when I'm a chef and I'm coming and asking you what you want to eat. uh, it seemed very unreal back then. A lot of it has happened today. It's still not as seamless as brands foresaw it, like, because we like to dream of things that will happen like after a long time, but it still has happened. And today, practically, I would say there's maybe 100 times more podcasts than there were in 2018-19 about the same time. My question is, as you have spent so much of time doing what you do, you've studied media, you have your thoughts on it, where do you think we are headed to? Like, where is media headed to? Or do you see podcasts as being the way forward? uh, how is the content consumption itself going to shape up given where we are going? And of course, this is all your personal opinion, I know, but I'm still very curious on how does someone who spent a lot of time doing these things think about it.
I'm really excited for, let's say, if people can start talking with some people's holograph, or people talking with other people, maybe like a MetaQuest podcast, like you're literally just talking to people in their headphone, or like I think like anything is possible. um I myself really think about what is like the mixed reality of future. I don't think podcast is gonna be the major source of ways people consume content for um a long time. I think podcasts will always exist because in the past it's called the radio. And before the radio, like people always talk. People listen to, CDs, right? Like it's like a CD of like people talking about like their journey within like a book or something format. So I feel like the sound kind of version of the media have it is always going to be existing. But as you know, like this year we are really onto like short form content consumption era, and people are consuming short form content on their phone. And I think in the future the format will definitely shift towards like different kind of um media that like powered by different kind of hardware. So I don't really necessarily know what exactly the format will take place. Maybe it's a holograph, maybe it is a spatial computing. Maybe it is like, people on their VR headset, or, any format of content could be possible. But I do think like the sound kind of media will still be there.
But how do you see like the monetization aspect of it shaping up? And I'm
But
genuinely
I mean,
curious about that because I see these AI models popping up and like AI shows coming up, and I don't know where we are headed as creators. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the best creators will always find ways to monetize. I think it really depends on what value you are bringing with your content. It doesn't necessarily means like, every creator will easily transition into different platforms. But I think if you create something valuable, people find it valuable, and then you will be able to monetize it.
Yeah, no, I see it like so. Again, the motto being that don't overthink, as in like don't worry too much, and it's you have to keep reminding yourself of that every now and then. Otherwise, it's very easy to get lost in whatever is happening around. But now to my big question, which is about what does it take to do over 100 podcast episodes? I don't know. Is it like what is the total count today? Do you have a count in your head?
Yeah. So for my main podcast, I have 154 episode, and then for the new podcast, I'm probably close to 100. I didn't really count. We started the everyday thing since like the second week of January. Um, we're at like week 17, I believe. So I think to do 100 podcasts is I don't think you should chase a number. You should chase like what you feel like comfortable with, like the amount of content you put out there, as like the quality of the content, how much like how many people you're helping, and then how much like lessons that or like knowledge you are absorbing as a person. I feel like it really shouldn't be like chasing the number.
Yeah, no, but still, like you were ranked as the top 1.5% of most popular shows globally. You have a listenership in 100 plus countries. Did you like design this all to happen? Did it just happen? And most of all, like there are days where you don't feel like publishing content. I have gone through it in only the number of episodes we've done. It sometimes gets tiring. So is it discipline, willpower, planning, all of it? Maybe like how have you built this? Like how do you get your guest today? It's not easy to ping someone. Maybe it is relatively easy now, but when you started out, and this is mostly from the lens of someone listening here and thinking about, hey, I want to start my own show. uh, Again, people get ahead of the curve and they start thinking about, oh, I'm going to monetize it and I'm going to have like Naval Ravikant to show up and this is going to blow up and all of that, but that doesn't happen the way they think in their heads. So how has all of it shaped out for you?
I think it really depends on your mission. If your mission is like strong enough to drive you, I feel like that's one thing. And then the other thing is like, I think focus on things that you're good at, or focus on things that you enjoy doing. So I don't think necessarily everyone should be podcasting because it is very heavy lifting in terms of like, the business development side of things, the marketing side of things, the editing side of things. Everything takes a lot of work. And even like, for the content itself, like really being heavily consume a lot of content to prep every single episode also takes a lot of work. I would say really find the medium that works best for you. So, I've seen some friends who are doing great on their newsletter, who are great at like, doing TikTok, and then who's amazing on Twitter. I feel like there's so many different format that there is one thing that may just suits you better than everything else. And also I've saw people have great success when they do solo episodes. So for example, for you, maybe you're a data expert that you can just do like the 10-minute solo episode about talking about one specific data term. I feel like those could be very helpful for people who have no data knowledge, or like they want to advance their career in data science. Or I would see someone doing like a short format of content that's like based on one specific subject expertise, that I feel like those are very interesting topics for people to consume, as people could just listen to it when they're walking to the mall, or like walking to like a grocery store, or like on their way waiting for their friends to come. Or I feel like the short format, or just any other format that suits your personal style, is probably a lot better for you to maintain it within your daily work and life.
Yeah. I don't want to put you in a tough spot here by asking you like who's the most interesting person you have hosted and whatnot, but I do want to basically still know what are the top three. So I'm a big fan of compressed learning. You have spoken to people. Most of what I know has happened because of being around interesting people. And as you have hosted this, I think like what gets published is just one aspect. When you are interacting with guests back room as well, there's a lot to learn. You're maybe making notes. You're maybe making observation. That research sometimes is more exciting than the episode itself. And I'm a big fan. Like for example, there's this lady I really admire, and there's no affiliation to her, but Paulina, she does a newsletter called The Profile, and she covers like the life of one very successful person, like billionaires and people of that sorts. And it's so interesting. Like I was thinking about it now. She's been able to monetize it. There's so much to learn. I at least get inspired a lot by content like that. So for you, Grace, on your show, as you've hosted these many people, like could you list down some of the most three, four most interesting concepts, facts, stories? Could be a mix of any of it you've learned as you've hosted so many people over the years.
Totally. I think I've learned a lot of everything from different guests. And I would say, like, on top of my head, like, I was thinking, whenever people ask me this question, I feel like one thing I've learned was each person should focus on like things that they are good at, and then like finding people to, I guess, like who are complementary to their skill set. I've heard about this from like multiple guests. And then in terms of guests themselves, I feel like one person that come to mind is like Monty Moran. He was a former co-CEO of Chipotle. And I thought, so he went undercover to the employee training program, and he have talked to over 20,000 employees at Chipotle. And I thought it was like very interesting because I thought that this could be something that I would do if I were running a business but like I don't have 20,000 employees that I can talk to. I feel like, this is like a really good example of really build trust with the community within your company. I feel like if one day I have a company that big or like at scale, I would still want to know every single person's, like, ask their name, at least, like, to learn about like why people work there, and then actually listening to people on like what things are done well and then what things are not. I feel like that's like a very interesting lesson that I've heard. And I don't want to like pick like, I feel like we have so many interesting guests. I'm thinking, I think
For
like
sure.
Jim McCovey, the co-founder of Square, was also a really interesting guest. I think one of the interesting perspective was, I feel like in the past, I'm, before coming to Silicon Valley, I'm always fear of like, oh, what if someone, steal this idea from us? And like, but however, he mentioned like, he talked about the innovation stack, and he talked about like, um, things are not as easy as like so and so copy your product feature. There's a lot of goes into success. Those are like my lessons. I don't want to butcher like how he frame it in his book, but that's what I thought like a really good one. And then he also talked about how he met Jack Dorsey. Jack Dorsey was his intern, and then who was like very young at the point, and then like they have some sort of like an age gap, and then they started a business together later on. And then you really shouldn't overlook people because of their age or because of they don't look like a typical co-founder profile. You never know who could be like a good co-founder. I thought that was a really interesting lesson as well. I'm still thinking, like, I have so many interesting guests. I'm just thinking, um, we had the CMO of Deloitte on our show. Um, Susan Konko, and I believe she said like, one thing she said was like, sometimes like we really want to polish a response. Well, like this is my learning. I don't want to, again, like I don't remember the exact words, but I coming out of the episode, I was thinking to myself, sometimes we all we're overthinking on our like response, no matter if it's an email or something. So we like sit there and then we like wait a long time to draft something. And sometimes like it's instead of like trying to make something perfect, sometimes like it's better to like get it done first. So again, like I don't really remember the exact words that she used, but those are like my learnings from like chatting with her. I feel like sometimes like not overthinking and get things done is better than like overthinking and drag it down for a long time.
Yeah, Grace, like as you're talking about this, there's something very interesting happening on my end. So when you said that, hey, look for a complementary skill set, uh, I was almost intrigued to pause you there and ask, oh, so how do you do it? And then the last person you mentioned, where you're saying that, hey, we often overthink it. There's another side of me which is questioning myself that why am I still like, because to me personally, and being very transparent here, I don't think I have hit that stage where I can like not think about a lot of stuff. Like I still like to plan things, and sometimes I know it leads to it's just overthinking, and it's a lot of energy drained out, which I want to work on actively. So as you're talking, it's very refreshing to see, hey, no, building an audience doesn't have to be something you plan. Just do what you love, right? Like, and people who say this are who are really, really, really successful, and I think they say this when they have sort of like unlocked this or like maybe gone through that path of overthinking, realizing it's of no use. And then ultimately when they're like looking at it from the bird's eye view of whatever happened in the past few years or decades, they come to this realization that, oh, so that's what we also do, right? Like if you have a kid coming in today to us and saying, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, you'd be like, don't do it, take it light, it's all okay. But when we were there, we don't do it. So as you were talking about it, I was very tempted to ask that question, which is like, how do you find someone with a complementary skill set? But I'm not like necessarily going to ask you that question now, unless of course you have something to add on that front. But uh, Grace, basically, as we are closing the end of the show, I definitely want to have like some closing note from your end, which is sort of in the form of a learning that you'd like to share with the rest of the audience. And of course, you've already shared a lot of learnings, but if there's anything still remaining.
Okay, I want to answer your questions. One is like, how do you find someone with complementary skill set? I think it's really difficult. I also think it's taking a lot of luck. I think number one is you actually have to understand what you're good at and what you're looking for. So if you really write down, what you're good at, and then like by also like find, things that you really need to do, but you're not very good at it, like also write down that. That's like the person who should be good at these like, other check marks, right? I feel like you really, number one, you have to know yourself to really figure out like who you should be looking for. And then number two is like creating these opportunities for yourself, right? You are currently creating these opportunities for yourself right now by, recording this podcast together with me. And, I'm not saying like I could be a complimentary person for you, but, maybe I know someone who will, or maybe your other guest is, you never really know how the serendipity is gonna come to you, present themselves. I think that's number two, and then number three is like honestly, like it's also a numbers game and repetition and luck in general. I don't think like most people don't meet like a co-founder or someone super crucial for their business by just by like day one. It takes time to really like figure out, but like I feel like it's what's beautiful, it's like the journey itself. For before you look for someone, like you may have to do a lot of things on your own, and then you may struggle to get business off the ground. And in the end of the day, when you find the perfect partner for your business, or like perfect accelerator to your success, you will be so much happier because of you have went through all this journey. And I feel like it makes life a lot happier and easier and more fulfilled when people with a certain type of experience. And to address your second question, so how to not overthinking for things, I think I overthink myself. I think one of the things of not overthinking is think about overthinking. So like you really think about what exactly would go wrong. And then you tell yourself like what would go right. And then you compare the notes. Like if what could go right is overvalued than what could go wrong. And you make a conscious decision of doing something. That's how I think about not overthinking. It's like you quickly think about if something goes right. If like, I invite Grace onto my podcast, what could go right? She could offer me some advice on like how to run my podcast, and I could make a friend, and there's maybe more audience from hers like would like my show too, right? So that's what could go right. And what could go wrong is like Grace don't respond to me. And then you send a request, hey Grace, do you want to come onto my show, right? So this is how you quickly think about something. This is just an example. It could be anything. It could be like, should you raise X amount of dollar from investors? It could be anything else. Like, you just quickly make the math happen in your head. if you walk through the worst case scenario and then you can still handle it, maybe it is the right decision for you. So you quickly move forward with your decision. So I feel like that's called what's not overthinking. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very very interesting. There's a book on it. Actually, two books that come to my mind. One is a book called Unthink. It talks about how chess players, when they're like in the game, think of 40 moves ahead of themselves, which is like, hey, if I do this, my opponent is going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then they play like 10 scenarios because they have 10 moves on their end. And this book talks about how you can apply this to everything in life. Like if you're gonna meet someone, you're on a date, you're on a business meeting, you want to impress someone, like how you can use this. But ultimately what it's teaching you is to how to think really well. And the second book is Mental Trap. It talks about how we often get caught up in this whirlwind of what if this happens and what if that happens. So pretty much what you just said, that hey, test it quickly or test it faster. Like it exactly goes and says the same thing, that it's not a bad thing to overthink, but you should not be spending hours and hours overthinking and not making any progress. Like if you thought something, validate it, move to the next step to think about the new thing, and you would probably like design your life to be lucky. And luck is not something that just happens. You can position yourself to be lucky. But overall, loved the inputs, Grace. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. Where can people reach out to you if they wanted to? I'm going to hyperlink all the episodes, everything you mentioned. Hopefully also find the interesting people you mentioned, like the learnings you had, and like try linking those episodes. But where can people reach out to you if they wanted to?
Thank you so much, Vikram, for having me on your show. I'm sorry, I feel like the last part of me was a little bit narcissistic of how I could offer value to you when you have me on your show. But in general, I feel like you could reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Twitter is Grace Gong GG, and LinkedIn is Grace Gong, just my name. And I'm on every social media platform, as like YouTube or Instagram. And you could also find my podcast. It's called Smart Venture Podcast. My new podcast, The Daily Show, is on LinkedIn, YouTube, and everywhere as well. It's called Venture with Grace.
Awesome. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for coming here, Grace, and for sharing all the insights.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Appreciate you having me on your show.